Okay, we're calling the meeting to order. Bernie, can you do the roll call?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. Mr. Barber? Ms. Bird?
Here.
Ms. Cook?
Here.
Mr. Dastra?
Here.
Ms. Elias?
Here.
Mr. Feldman?
Here.
Mr. McGrath?
Here.
Ms. Rufo?
Here.
And Chairman Adams.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve. Second.
Are there any corrections? What do I do?
You can either do need to take a roll call vote, or you can ask just all affirmation by ayes.
Can we have an affirmation by ayes?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Are there any negatives?
Hearing none, motion carries.
Hearing none, motion carries. Okay, so the next topic is a report from the chair, which is me. Over in the last 2 weeks, Ms. Bird and I have contacted some other locations for consideration for meetings. Ms. Bird has a list of locations, and I've requested she give those to Bernie. If anyone else has ideas moving forward, please send those contacts to Bernie, and we'll have a list of locations we can have meetings at. The other thing is, thanks to resident Linda Schreiner, I'm not sure I pronounced that right, and her constructive feedback at our last meeting, we've updated the home rule landing page on the city website to make it easier for residents to study along with us. I would ask if the commissioners have any additional recommendations to contact me, and I'll continue working with the communications team at the city. At our last meeting, we were asked to review, at our last meeting, our consultants asked us to review the optional third-class city charter, third-class city code, the 2023 budget overview, and the 2023 adopted city budget. Prior to this meeting, we were given an agenda, the July 6 minutes, a memo that PEL provided to us about next steps, and 2 study guides. And tonight, we will give a presentation, PEL will give us a presentation to help us better understand third-class city and how it's structured. But before we get started, are there any public comments? Hearing none, we can move forward with PEL's presentation.
Good evening. Make sure that that's working. Good evening. The PEL team is here. To my right is Jerry Cross, and to my left is Patty Moorhead, and I'm Fred Reddick. What we'd like to do is, following up on Vice Chair Rufo's comments about the materials that were provided to you, we provided a cover memo that breaks down the homework assignment that was discussed at the last meeting. Tonight, what we'd like to do is focus specifically on the third-class city optional plan, Plan A provisions, and then contrast that with third-class city code provisions. At the next meeting on August the 3rd, we'll do a presentation on the city budget, on revenue, where the revenue is coming from, expenditures, what are the city's priorities from an expenditure standpoint. We're not going to quiz you tonight, but we would certainly entertain any questions that you have as we go through the discussion. We broke down the relevant portions of both the third-class city optional charter law and the rather voluminous third-class city code itself, so that in your study guide, we extracted what we consider the most relevant parts to help you delve into how the city is currently structured, how it is currently supposed to work under the provisions of law that have been enacted. The city did exercise the option under the third-class city code back after it was enacted in 1957 to adopt the optional Plan A form of government, which is the mayor-council form of government. And we are providing that on the overhead for those that may be following along at home. I think all of you have that as a handout on your computer that you can go follow through as we go through our discussion. The optional charter Plan A provisions, as I indicate, provides for a strong mayor-council form of government. Currently, there are about 6 other cities in the Commonwealth, and they're identified there. The closest ones are York and Harrisburg that have exercised that option and that still operate under the Plan A form of government. Many of them are relatively close in population to what Lancaster is. So that could be communities, when you reach this point, that you may want to select 1 or 2 of those to talk with. Under the optional charter provisions, the city has opted to select a 7-member council that is elected at large. That is one of the options that was available and was selected. In contrast to the third-class city code, which has a commission form of government where there are 5 elected council members, and each of those council members heads a particular department. The mayor is responsible for the public affairs department. That basically involves the police department. The other members of council can select, or the commission would designate the other offices that they would follow, which includes accounts and finance, public safety, streets and improvement, and parks and public property. What I'd like to do, and if we want to move to the organizational chart, this is the organizational chart under the Plan A form of government under which the city is currently structured. You have the elected offices of mayor, of the members of council, of the city controller, and of the city treasurer. The mayor is responsible for all of the different departments. Currently, that includes the Department of Public Safety, Administrative Services, Neighborhood Engagement, Community Planning and Economic Development, and Public Works. There's also the Office of Solicitor, and the solicitor is responsible for the Bureau of Procurements. City Council designates a city clerk, and who serves at the discretion of council. If we can move to Article 3 of the optional charter, we've highlighted the Article 3 deals with general powers and limitations, and we've highlighted certain sections there that we felt are most relevant. The plan that has been adopted under the Act that is common to optional plans becomes the law of the city. And consistent with the law, it is a grant of powers and limitations, restrictions, and regulations that are outlined under the Plan A provisions. Each city that is governed under an optional form shall have the full power to organize and regulate its internal affairs, to establish, alter, and abolish offices, positions, and employment, and to define the functions, powers, and duties thereof, and to fix their tenure and term and compensation. They have the authority, the city has the authority to adopt and enforce local ordinances, to construct, acquire, operate, and maintain public improvements, projects, or enterprises for any public purpose, and to exercise all powers of local government in such manner as the governing body may determine. Has the authority to sue and be sued, to have a corporate seal, to contract and be contracted with, to buy, sell, lease, hold, and dispose of real and personal property, to appropriate and expend monies through the budget process. Also has the authority to exercise the powers of condemnation as well as borrowing and taxation subject to general law provisions that are applicable to all cities. The general grant of municipal power is intended to confer the greatest power of local self-governance that is consistent with the Constitution as well as laws of general application, and it shall be liberally construed in favor of the city. Now, there are certain limitations under the optional charter provisions. The charter shall not give any power or authority to diminish any rights or privileges of any city employee in their pension or retirement system. The city shall exercise any powers or authority beyond the city limits except as shall be conferred by an act of the General Assembly. In other words, you're limited to addressing issues within the city, not external to the city. And no city shall engage in any proprietary or private business except as authorized by the General Assembly. There are some specific statutes that come into play that are limiting. I think we had discussed that in our prior presentation, but they're highlighted here under Section 305. Laws that are applicable across the board to all classes of municipalities. And those limits include providing for the filing and collection of municipal tax liens and for the sale of real or personal property in satisfaction of the lien or claim, providing for the exercise of eminent domain, providing for the assessment of damages and benefits for property taken, providing for the annexation or exclusion or detachment of territory. Basically, that's covered by the boundary change statute. Regulation of public schools, providing for personal registration of electors, which is covered by the state election law. Limiting rates and fixing subjects of taxation. Relating to civil service, to public health, and statutes that are applicable in all parts of the Commonwealth, such as the Municipalities Planning Code, the Labor Relations Statutes, Act 111 and 195 are examples of those. Now, Article 4 is specific to Lancaster and the Mayor-Council Plan A government that has been adopted by the city. Again, the city shall be governed by an elected council, mayor, treasurer, and elected controller. Those are the elected positions provided for under Plan A. The council, and you've chosen to select 7 members of council. The members are elected at large. There is not an option under the optional Plan A provision to have a ward system. They're elected at large. And we talk about filling a vacancy by a majority of the members of council in the office of council. If a vacancy occurs in the other elected offices of mayor, city treasurer, or controller, the council fills those vacancies. The legislative power of the city is vested in city council. The council, in addition to other powers and duties, may require any city officer to prepare and submit sworn statements regarding their official duties and the performance thereof, and they may otherwise investigate the conduct of any department, office, or agency. Council appoints the city clerk. The council may also provide for the appointment of a city solicitor, the planning board, zoning hearing board of adjustment, and any other commissions or bodies with advisory powers. We move to the office of mayor and the mayor's administration. The executive power of the city is vested in the office of the mayor. The mayor is charged with enforcing the charter and ordinances enacted by the city and all general laws that are applicable thereto. The mayor supervises all departments of city government as noted in the organizational chart and requires each department to make an annual report of its work as deemed desirable. The mayor has the responsibility to either approve any ordinance that's enacted by council or to return it to council with a statement setting forth the objections to the ordinance. No ordinance shall take effect without the mayor's approval unless the mayor fails to return the ordinance within 10 days or unless council, upon reconsideration of the mayor's rejection, overrides the mayor's veto by a 2/3 majority of the members of council. The mayor may attend meetings of council and may take part in discussions, but has no vote in council. All bonds, notes, contracts, and written obligations of the city are executed by the mayor and by the controller. The mayor shall designate any department head or city clerk to act as mayor whenever prevented due to absence, disability, or other cause. The city treasurer shall perform such functions and duties and have such powers relating to the collection, receiving, safekeeping, and payment of public monies, and other powers and duties as may be assigned by council. The city may have a department of administration, and you've chosen to do that, and shall have such other departments not exceeding a total of 9, as council may establish by ordinance. Again, those departments are identified in the organizational chart. All administrative functions, powers, and duties of the city, other than those vested in the city clerk and the city treasurer and controller, are allocated and assigned to the various departments. Each department is headed by a director who shall be appointed by the mayor with the advice and consent of council. No member of council shall head a department. The mayor has the authority to remove any department head. Department heads may appoint subordinate officers and employees within their respective departments and may, with the approval of the mayor, remove said employees and officers. Where a Department of Administration is established, as has occurred in Lancaster, it's headed by a director designated as the business administrator, who is chosen based on his or her executive and administrative qualifications. The business administrator shall have and exercise and discharge the functions, powers, and duties under the direction and supervision of the mayor. Those responsibilities include assist in the preparation of the budget, administer a centralized purchasing system, and perform such other duties as council may prescribe. The city budget. The budget is prepared by the mayor with the assistance of the business administrator, and during the month of November, the mayor shall require all department heads to submit requests for appropriations and to appear before the mayor or the business administrator at such public hearings held during the month on the various requests. At the last stated meeting in November, the mayor is to submit his proposed budget to council in the form of an ordinance, together with an explanatory comment or statement as deemed desirable. The budget shall be in such form as is required of council for city budgets, and shall, in addition, have appended thereto a detailed analysis of the various items of expenditure and revenue. Council may reduce any item or items in the mayor's budget by a majority vote. An increase in any item shall require an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the members of council. The budget shall be adopted no later than the end of December of each calendar year. The council shall provide for the maintenance of a system of work programs and quarterly allotments for the operation of the budget. It's the responsibility of the officer or department administering such programs to develop and report appropriate costs of budgeted expenditures. The council shall provide by ordinance for the exercise of a control function. The control function shall include provisions for an encumbrance system for expenditures only upon written requisition, for the pre-audit by the city controller of all claims and demands against the city prior to payment, and for the control of all payments out of public funds. The council may also provide for annual post audits of all accounts by an outside certified public accountant to be appointed by council. And if we move to Article 6, there are some general provisions that are common to all of the optional plans under the optional charter provisions. Officers and employees, basically this is a conflict of interest statement under Act 601. 603, no candidate for office, appointment, or employment, and no officer, appointee, or employee in the city shall directly or indirectly give or promise any person, any office, position, or employment, benefit, or anything of value for the purposes of influencing or obtaining political support. And they may be disqualified from office should that occur. Section 606, legislation by council. Council shall by ordinance or resolution designate the time of holding regular meetings, at least monthly. The mayor or the president of council, as the case may be, in this case, the president of council, upon written request of the majority of the members of council, shall call a special meeting. Council shall determine its own rules of procedure that are not inconsistent with ordinance or statute. Subsection 6 deals with the compensation that is fixed by council for the controller, treasurer, and department heads. Compensation of the mayor, councilman, and controller, and treasurer pursuant to the act shall be fixed by ordinance of council. No ordinance other than the local budget ordinance shall take effect less than 20 days after final passage by council and approval by the mayor. No rule or regulation made by any department, officer, agency, or authority, except as it relates to the organization or internal management of city government or a part thereof, shall take effect until it is either filed with the city clerk or in other manner as provided for in the ordinance. Those are we feel are the relevant provisions of the optional charter Plan A provisions.
What you heard Fred talk about was what we discussed last time was Dillon's rule in practice. This is what the state is allowing cities to do as part of their everyday business model, how they provide services. And in the context of home rule or self-government by referendum, these are kind of the powers that are implicit in governing what you need to have available to do and provide either government functions or government services. So when we talk about Dillon's rule and what is allowed by the legislature, you're essentially, if you decide that this form of government needs to be changed, you're essentially then granting those powers locally. You'll be developing the powers that are granted locally rather than coming down from Harrisburg. And you can see the powers that are listed in the first section were pretty explicit. And the legislature purposely limited what municipalities can do under this Plan A. What's also important to see in this is the interplay between the executive and the legislative branch. You know, we use the word executive and legislative as if they're in the context of the federal government, and in local government they're not. They're more in the division of labor, division of duties and responsibilities. And you saw how carefully the legislature was to assign duties and powers to this mayor with explicit powers by the council, and the responsibilities toward each. One prepares the budget, one approves the budget. One can change the budget, but it has to do so with an extraordinary number of votes. So there's that interplay there, and that's common in all forms of government that tries to separate away from that commission form of government that Fred talked about. And that'll be the next part, the third-class city code, where you'll see a difference in approach and how a city of weaker mayor, 4 council people with a voting mayor on the council would address these things and the powers that they would have versus what is Plan A. Fair enough?
As you digest the optional charter provisions, I think those are the areas that you really want to look at whenever you reach the point where you're interviewing city officials. To understand, what I've tried to lay out is what the statute provides for. Your charge as you're reviewing and going through the deliberative process that you are is to see how it's working in practice. Is it working the way it's identified to work? And are there strengths in how it's working now? Are there weaknesses or deficiencies in how it's working now? Okay, we're going to move then to the third-class city code. And as Jerry indicated, we'll try to highlight some relevant sections. I think the code itself is somewhere around 400 pages, and we don't expect you to, really digest 400 pages. The code was modernized relatively recently. It was updated in 2015 through a combined effort by the Local Government Commission, the Pennsylvania Municipal League, and ultimately the legislature enacted a modified or a modernized and more updated version of the third-class city code. But understand that that Lancaster has opted for the charter provisions under Plan A. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the differences that are identified in the third-class city code. And I believe we had mentioned before, and I think your solicitor had also mentioned this, if the optional charter is silent on an issue, then it reverts back to the third-class city code. And the third-class city code is what would be your enabling legislation. But if the optional charter is specific, then that's what you need to follow. I'm not going to go through in extensive detail, but I do want to highlight some of the provisions, and we'll start with Chapter 104. One of the distinctions is the ability under the third-class city code to have an apportionment of wards within the city. Again, the optional charter does not provide for that. The third-class city code does provide that option, and there is a process that would be followed to do that. If we go through to Chapter 110, council, this establishes the qualifications of council, something that isn't specifically identified in the optional charter. And you have the qualifications that are required of an individual to be elected to council. You also have an identification of incompatible offices, where an individual who may serve, for instance, as a county officer, an officer of a school district, an officer or employee of the city, is not able to serve as a member of council. There are certain standard and nationally recognized codes that are provided for. One of those, and I think we touched on this at the last meeting, is the Pennsylvania Construction Code. And I think a question came up relative to that issue. The Pennsylvania Construction Code is a law of general application, applicable across the board to all municipalities, including Lancaster. Council can go beyond that in enacting codes that are more specific, so long as they're not inconsistent with the Pennsylvania Construction Code. Chapter 112 talks about the qualifications for the office of the mayor. It also vests in the mayor certain policing powers and the authorization to determine a state of emergency should a situation exist that requires that, and also to perform marriage ceremonies. You have the qualifications of the city treasurer. The optional charter provides for the city treasurer, but it doesn't specifically set forth the qualifications, and you'll see those identified in Chapter 114, Section 114.01. It's also important to note that the city treasurer does serve as the tax collector for the city.
Can I ask a question?
Oh,
Yeah.
You say that as the treasurer serves as a tax collector, that's in relationship to the third-class code,
Yes,
not to the optional plan? Or both?
both.
Thank you.
In terms of the real estate tax, not the Act 511 taxes, but the real estate tax.
I got a question back on chapter 110. We kind of like skipped over that. And that initiating of a proposed ordinance by petition and exception, can you give me some examples of that? And would that allow, I guess, residents to, and I guess as we're going through this process, if there was an ordinance that we want changed, there is a process that we could go through to initiate that would not come through council it would come by, 100 signatures, and then we would have to get 20% of the voters. Can you give me some examples of that instead of waiting 2 years to do the home rule if we're going through this study and see something? Is this something we can implement or what?
Darlene, so I'm clear, what section again?
I am in chapter 110.
It was in the whole-
I guess it's page 110:13.
Yeah, I don't think it's in the highlighted.
No,
It's not in the highlighted
Oh,
area.
You're in the 189-page code or something, right? But,
Alright.
yeah,
We skipped over that. We jumped from, I
yeah,
think,
yeah.
8, we didn't even hit
Right,
10.
that involves the citizens' right to petition their government and initiate action that they feel the council needs to consider or the city has to consider. It also gives them some oversight on laws passed. It empowers the citizens. I'm not aware of a lot of instances in third-class cities under the code or the plans that happens. When I read it, I always felt that it was kind of an onerous, it was a high bar to jump over. It was how many votes you said, 20% of the governors?
20%.
And very limited time to collect those.
Well, you
so-
need 100 to actually get the ordinance on the ballot.
To get-
but for
yeah.
it to pass, if it would go,
Yeah.
and council would decide if it would be a referendum,
In theory, it's
go on the
possible.
ballot.
Maybe your solicitor has some examples for central Pennsylvania. I'm not aware of a whole lot of them.
Oh.
This was a recognized citizens' right. It comes from the West Coast largely from the early 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, from Oregon and Washington. Where there was a movement for almost pure local democracy, kind of like you see in Maine with town councils and such. In home rule charters in Pennsylvania, it is sort of standard to provide a version of initiative and referendum with abilities that are either stricter or less strict depending on the thinking, because the gatekeeper is obviously the charter. So you don't often see people jumping over the council by initiative referendum. You see them forcing a consideration. And then if there's a failure to respect that, then you can put it on the ballot to enact it as an ordinance. But those are things that the citizens would have as a right as the ultimate authorities in a municipality. It's cumbersome, it's tricky, plus it's a referendum, right? But that is one of the things that is available under home rule. You would modify that kind of thing, or you keep it. A lot of the charters I've seen have much smaller hurdles for petitions to get it in front of council, because that's akin to stepping up at the podium and saying, I represent 10 people, but they only represent themselves. So when you show up with a petition saying, I represent 100 people, they really do.
Right.
Okay, so the council has to respect that. The actual enacting of ordinance is much higher bar, because then you start to take away the authority from the elected officials. And you have to watch that, you gotta watch that balance there,
Right.
okay?
So as a home rule charter, we would have to specify language in there
Oh, absolutely.
about this?
Yeah.
Or if we would just oversee it, it would just automatically go to what the state says if we
Oh,
didn't
no,
address it?
if you
Well, not-
decide to go to a charter, Ms. Byrd, you would have to specify
We would have to address this.
to allow it to happen. If it's
Okay.
silent, generally speaking, you wouldn't have it in your town. You wouldn't revert back to the charter, the code rather.
Yeah, no, I'm glad Darlene brought that up because I don't know if Mr. Harris remembers, but I was asking you about that very same thing, like about a year ago. Like I've personally looked into utilizing that. I think it's an important tool to keep. So I'm just stating my opinion on that.
Yeah,
I think the third class city code, it's actually kind of confusing because I think I specifically asked Bernie, like what constitutes an official petition? And then the hurdles that he would have to go through to have 15 days of open office for people to just come and sign.
It's
10
a high,
people,
it's a high hurdle.
Yeah.
It really,
Yes.
and so it's a good example in editorial voice. It's an example of a power granted to the citizens, but delimited in such a way that it was more of in the granting and not in the authority. Yeah, you have initiative and referendum rights in the third class city code. It's going to have to be really tough topic to generate that kind of public interest. You know, it's going to have to be a really, really, when you say,
High bar.
yeah,
It's a high bar.
yeah, the legislature gave it, but they really constrained it. And you can see why. They have to write laws for every town in the Commonwealth,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Okay, and I have another question on chapter 111. It's 111 and it's 1103 point designation of department directors, public affairs. And I didn't get to see the chart that we have for the city, but we have not appointed a Department of Public Affairs now. Is that correct?
Not according to the.
No.
We have not.
No,
We have
part of
not.
the organizational. That is under the third-class city code,
Right,
not under the optional charter.
The optional
Right.
charter gives you the departments you would.
Right.
and that-
but it's something as a charter that we would have to address, or
Yeah.
it would go to the code, correct?
Go back to the organizational chart, that shows the departments that have been created to date by the city. You can have up to 9. You've created 6 of them
Right.
at this point.
Yeah, something like that.
Department of Public Safety would come closest to the
Okay,
Yeah, and the
public
question,
affairs.
the question you have to wrestle with is 9 too much, 9 too little? Should we have a wide open ability to do this? The code says one thing, the optional plan law says another. Is that too many? Is that too little?
and that's something we would have to decide if we were
While you're
to
studying,
come up with our own.
while
Okay.
you're looking at
Very good.
this, don't skip to the end of the book and
Right.
say, the charter does this. Look at, the city does this now.
Mm-hmm,
How's that working out for you?
Right.
That kind of stuff.
okay, and then right at 11-105, I see about quarterly reports from departments where, at the close of each quarter of a fiscal year, a department director shall prepare and submit to the director of the Department of Accounts and Finance. If the Department of Accounts, they should do a quarterly report that's made available. Is that something that we do now, or is that something if we do a charter, we would want to request?
Well, that's
Because
the
I've
point.
never seen a quarter report on our budget from any department.
That's one of the questions that, should be posed whenever you're talking with different officials.
So, okay.
Again,
So that's
what,
something we would ask for that
yeah,
information, that we could
Again,
ask
what
for
we're
that.
trying to do is to highlight how the law provides for your form of government. What you need to do then, after you understand, digest that, and then pose questions to the different officials to find out, is it working in practice the way it's supposed to work?
Okay,
And is that a good thing? Or are there certain problems with it? Are there weaknesses?
okay, so the way I understand it, this code is what we should be doing now.
The
Or no.
optional charter is what you
The optional
should be.
charter is what you work
We
under.
should,
Right.
okay,
That's the
okay,
short
this
one,
is,
right?
that's the
The
short
short
one.
one, yeah.
And if it doesn't address things in this code, then,
But that's always a matter of interpretation by the lawyers and by law.
okay,
What we
Okay.
gave you here, and I kind of apologize for dumping all the stuff on you in
Mm-hmm.
the early going. That was maybe a rookie error. I apologize for that. What we did do tonight, or last week, is try to refine it so that we gave you the whole charter law,
mm-hmm,
because that's what you operate under, right?
Right.
That's your operating manual for this form of government. We gave you the supplemental stuff that is potentially under your authority
mm-hmm.
from the third-class code, things that didn't get, what do I want to say, Fred? Exclusive,
Addressed in the charter.
or are in the city code that are not allowed because the charter law lets you do it. Department of Administration, the mayor's submitting of a budget, that kind of stuff. So you know that governs. That's why we gave you the whole thing of the one, God bless you, of the one, and a much more excerpted section, much smaller, 14 pages or so, from the code itself, because those are the relevant things. Okay, because we were talking at dinner, we kind of like got you in first year of high school, threw all the books at you, and said, now, and you went home scared, and then you realized there was a whole year ahead of you to learn, And it was our job and your job to learn step by step what it is to look at. And we don't expect you to become experts in dog breeds. You know what I mean? We expect you to know the difference between a Great Dane and a poodle. And you're going to learn that through reading these guides and asking questions.
Can I, Darlene, these are fantastic questions. Thank you for reading that entire document, it seems.
Oh, only a little
I would
section
like
so
to
far.
just get us back to have you guys finish the study guide
Sure.
summary, just because, just watching the clock and want to make sure we're staying on target.
Okay, if we can continue,
I have more questions.
there are other, again, the third-class city code, chapter 115 provides for the appointment of a city engineer. 116 provides for the appointment of a city solicitor, as well as a assistant solicitor. 117 provides for the qualifications of a controller. The optional charter is really generally silent on the duties and responsibilities and qualifications of a controller. These are spelled out under Chapter 117, as well as for an independent auditor who would be selected to undertake the audit of the city. Chapter 118, we get into accounts and finance. We have a provision for supplemental appropriations that could occur during the fiscal year, as well as a process for transfers between appropriation items, as well as the investment of city funds and the ability to borrow in anticipation of revenue, basically what's referred to as a tax and revenue anticipation note. Chapter 119 provides the authority to execute contracts. Chapter 120 provides for the appointment and structure of a police department. Chapter 121, similar, providing for the organization or structure of a fire bureau within the city. You have the authority to establish a board of health. And then you have identified a number of corporate powers that can be done, things like shade trees and regulating pets, insurance, parking lots, etc. Moving down, council has the authority to create reserve funds, an operating reserve fund that can be used to minimize future revenue shortfalls or deficits. You have the authority to establish a municipal authority individually or an intergovernmental authority that would be done in concert with one or more other municipalities. You also have the ability to enter into cooperative agreements similar to or provided for under the Intergovernmental Cooperation Act for the joint delivery of services. Going to go to tax levies under 12.531. Council levies the rate on an annual basis of the tax that will be established or that will be imposed on all properties within the city. And there are limits Currently, it's 30 mil limit for cities. And there are some special taxing authorities as well for certain purposes, including street lighting, recreation, and the like, where you have the authority to levy an additional millage for those specific purposes and account for them for those purposes. You have the ability to provide for an exemption from taxes for the per capita residence tax. You have the authority to exercise the power of eminent domain. The next couple chapters deal with the ability to undertake certain utility services. Chapter 137, to provide for recreational services. The ability to provide for a property maintenance code, as I discussed earlier, so long as it's not inconsistent with the Uniform Construction Code. Chapter 143 deals with pensions, the authority to establish pension funds for police, for fire, for non-uniformed employees. Chapter 144 deals with civil service provisions. I think those are really the most relevant sections of the Third Class City Code that are not specifically addressed under the optional charter provisions. So again, what we try to do is to put your focus on the optional charter first. That's your primary law that governs the city. And then where there are certain blanks or areas that aren't addressed, fill in with provisions of the Third Class City Code itself. And with that, I'd like to open it up for additional questions.
Yes, okay, I have a question, if that's okay. Okay, how, under the optional charter, would we replace a mayor if something would happen and there was a vacancy? Who would then become the mayor? I know in the Third Class State Code, it's the vice chair
Council
of
has,
council.
yeah, council has that authority under, I'll get to the section.
11209.
No.
Oh, in
No.
the state
406?
406, that's not on here, yeah.
406B, Fred?
406,
Vacancy occurs in the office of the
yes,
mayor.
406. That's
important there.
council
Yeah, it's important there. It's
Yeah.
not a full term, it's a term till the next
election.
election.
Right, yeah. 406B under the charter provides for that.
406B. Okay,
If a vacancy occurs in the office of mayor, treasurer, or controller, the council shall fill the vacancy within 30 days to serve until the next municipal election.
B.
And then at the election, they only run for the remainder of the
Remainder of the term.
Correct.
Can you repeat that? So at the election, they only fill the seat until the end of the term, end of the current mayor's term.
It's very similar to what, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's very similar to what we're seeing currently with the 2-year vacancy on council. Like, council has the authority,
Exactly.
temporary appointment, and then they finish terms at elections if they win.
Yeah, that's addressed in 406A. Process with a vacancy on council.
What's important there is that there's time limits. They just can't keep the seat vacant. It's a guidance of 30 days. I think I know towns that have gone over that, the judges allowed it because it's more guidance, but it has to get done in a reasonable time. And then if there's a tie vote or something, it goes to the next level, which is the Court of County, Common Pleas in the county. But what's important to understand there is, there's a power granted to fill an executive position, but it is constrained, and it is limited, and if they don't act, someone else can act for them.
So, and just so I get an understanding, so the optional charter is what we have now,
Correct.
and
Right.
everything that's addressed in this code is addressed in the optional charter or pieces of it, and what is not in the optional charter refers back to this code.
That's correct, yes. That's
Gotcha.
correct, yes.
Okay.
That's why, we're suggesting that you keep the focus on the optional charter, because that is the law of the land, if you will, for Lancaster. And then only where there are gaps, you
Refer,
backfill it with
Yes.
provisions of the third-class city code.
okay, got it. Thank you.
No.
There. All right. So if we go down the road of drafting our own charter, that phenomenon goes away. Like there's not like we write a charter, our charter is silent on an issue, then the third-class city code kicks in.
Yeah,
Is that
and
true or-
I don't want to get the cart before the horse here, but you're correct. The charter, whatever you put in a charter is going to be the law
That's it.
for Lancaster.
Pretty much it.
Right.
You've basically walked away from the third-class city code at that point. You're still constrained under a charter with laws of general application,
Right.
but you've walked away from the third-class city code and the optional plan. Both of those documents are off the table. The charter,
That's it.
supplemented by an administrative code, becomes the law.
It's assumed you have the power to do anything you want, not constrained by uniform state laws. The current position is you're only allowed to do what the law allows you to do.
We're back to Dillon's law again.
Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
And then to jump off Mr. McGrann's question a little bit, so let's say we write a home rule charter and there is a power adopted that is like currently not really discussed by state law or federal law, like it's just, there's a total void. But we, I guess, had some foresight and thought about giving the city government that power in the charter. Have there ever been any instances of a charter being written and then a later state law requiring that specific power be essentially like it's voided because it's unconstitutional now, or like has that something like that ever
The
occurred?
legislature
Yeah,
could do
the
that if they
recall
wanted to.
provision is one that has been voided. I think the Rizzo case out of Philadelphia is what voided. There were some charters that provided for a recall of members of the governing body or of offices, and that was voided by the Rizzo decision.
Okay. So hypothetically, in drafting charters, like, we are responsible for drafting the charter, and obviously we should do our due diligence in understanding what is constitutional or not. But if we were to write something that's questionable, it could be challenged by the courts for a determination on whether or not it can remain valid.
It could be. It could be. Yes,
Okay.
it could be.
It wouldn't invalidate the charter, it would invalidate that power.
Okay.
But again, we're focusing on the optional plan. So
Right.
we're sort of like grounded on the optional plan country. The charter is the unexplored country.
Mr. Harris, just out of curiosity, is it possible, like, I don't know what the process was like to institute the optional charter in the first place, like the conversations, does the city have like any historical records on what guided the city at that point to that decision?
Actually, there is a file that's in my office. The process, it seems, is very similar to what we're undergoing right now, in which there was a study commission that was appointed. The study commission did a study over a number of months. Then there was a referendum. Well, there was a referendum placed before the voters before there was a study commission. And then the study commission opted to recommend the adoption of the optional charter. And that was placed before the voters in referendum, and it was approved by the voters.
Thank you.
Plain language, the relationship between the treasurer, the controller, and the case of a city like us, like, the business administrative side of things, like, how do those all interrelate to each other?
The treasurer and business administrator in particular are areas that I suggest whenever you are talking with those individuals, you explore, because I have seen, in my experience anyway, situations where there's some degree of duplication that occurs between those offices. The treasurer is basically the individual who is signing the checks, dispersing the money, collecting the money, depositing the money. The business administrator is administering the funds, administering the budget, preparing the budget, and then administering the budget. The controller is a little different position in that that's it can serve as a pre-audit function to validate expenditures, to look at the budget, whenever a request to expend money comes in, to reconcile that with the budget appropriation. Are there funds available? Are there not funds available? A control, if you will, the controller type of function. It's basically a pre-audit. It's not the audit, which is a post-financial activity, but the pre-audit before funds are expended to provide a check and balance, if you will.
Make sure there's money in the budget line item, it's not exceeded, those sort of things. It's authorized by the budget, that, someone is not playing fast and loose with an expense. As Fred said, pre-audit.
So is the idea, in your opinion, the idea behind those being elected positions that they're independent of the mayor and the administration?
Correct.
That their accountability is to the electors.
Yeah,
Correct.
exactly.
Yes.
And it's a cliche, but the controller can be considered sort of a watchdog on the handling of funds, not on performance, which is very critical. It's on the handling of funds. They even have subpoena power to examine, to compel the production of financial records by a department head or an official of the city. So they're looking at the financial propriety of what they're doing, not performance. Many other states, the controllers are responsible for performance audits also.
Okay, great, thank you.
To bounce off Mr. McGrant's question now a little bit. So if the idea is that the city treasurer and the city controller are independent, I'm actually a little curious because we got elected in a nonpartisan election. Have any charters ever said that the elections for positions should be nonpartisan as well?
I don't know that we allowed nonpartisan in the election code. I think that's Tony, you're running up against the state election code, remember. That is still the uniform act that every elected office is controlled by.
But it's okay if you don't know, does the election code require that elections remain partisan in that nature?
Do you know, Barry? I don't know. Yeah, we'd have to check on that.
We don't have open primaries, so.
Right, we don't
I
have
feel
open-
like that's a big sign that everything is very partisan.
And you do have independent participation in elections by a separate nomination process that a non-affiliated voter, non-affiliated candidate would have an August time to get into the November election, but there's no mechanism, as we said, for open primaries. That's,
I guess, I see what you're saying. Because the election code requires primaries, there might be a complication there.
Yeah, I don't know how you'd have the primary.
I don't know how you'd get over that,
Yeah.
right?
How would you,
That's the
Okay.
election
when
code.
would you, when would you have a run?
All right. I'll do some research too.
But in this stage of the study, you might want to look at the terms and how many contested elections there are. Okay? That's a question that's valid. Whether or not the entrance is too hard to come over, the entrance fee is too hard, or something along those, or there's no interest in the position because it's a rump position, or it's a position that is no longer, in the day of computers and everything else, is that just a rump position? A lot of counties question the need for an elected coroner with no qualification specified, right? An elected coroner with no qualification specified, but you have to have one. Some counties have moved to medical examiners that require. You get in trouble with the County Controllers Association now.
So in the optional plan, there are no qualifications outlined for those positions, but there are in the code.
In the
So
code,
those
there are.
codes apply.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The controller is really not talked about very much under the optional charter. The treasurer is talked about a little bit more in terms of duties, but qualifications are not listed.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. When are we going to get to ask, like, what our city is doing? As far as our treasurer, they turn the rights over to the administration of the city and what they can do. So when is this discussion, like we're saying, okay, this is how our city is working now?
Darlene,
That's something.
that's an actually good transition. So the next
Okay.
agenda item is our next steps for the commission
Okay.
and the next meeting. And we could, I was going to comment that we have a workload management challenge. And I think we need a process to study these key roles and who manages the city. And in the memo that PEL sent to us on Monday, they outlined, at a minimum, we talked to the mayor, council, treasurer, controller, city clerk, solicitor, and each department director. And then they also proposed 3 ways to approach the task. And do you all want to explain these 3 different ways we could approach
Steps.
talking to these officials?
Sure, we'd be glad to do that. We outlined, if you have that memo, 3 different options. You could, as a committee of the whole, with our assistance, develop a list of questions and then submit that to each individual in writing and ask for a written response. That's one option. The commission could interview the individuals as a committee of the whole. That's another option. And again, with our assistance, develop an agreed upon list of questions to give to the different officials and then select 1 or 2 or 3 individuals from the commission to actually do the interviews and then report back to the commission. So we've laid out kind of 3 different options there for you.
And not the same 3, obviously, a mixture of, so everyone's in the mix and everyone gets a chance.
I was reading the memo, thanks, and I thought the idea of just creating jointly set of questions to be submitted in writing and get written response is good, and then after that, we've got that in front of us, we say, I'm really interested to hear more and what like the solicitor has to say. We'd like to schedule or bring in that person for a more in-depth session or something. I thought seemed good to me, I'll say that.
I like Carl's suggestion.
I thought that was a good idea as well, because I thought it would give us time to be able to take the information, gather it, and kind of like formulate some good questions for further discussion with the person present.
So do we have a motion?
So is that option one that we're saying?
Commissioner Fuchsia,
It's option one in the
Okay.
yeah,
Now I'm
The
making
first
a
bullet,
motion.
yeah, it's the first bullet in the memo.
I like that, and I'll make the motion that we adopt the first recommended option to us, that we would work with PEL to develop a list of questions to submit in writing, receive responses, and then go from there. Is that good enough?
I second that.
I would like
Discussion.
to ask to motion to amend the motion, just to say that once we've formulated a list of questions as the commission, I'd like the public to have a chance to review them and provide public comment if they feel there's any additional questions that should be provided. And obviously, we make that determination whether they get included, but I feel like the public should at least have the ability to say, hey, I'd like you to consider adding this question to the list.
I think that the public will have an opportunity to participate. Once we collect the questions, submit them, and get written responses, we'll be here in this body kind of talking about them. The responses will be there and more questions can be added. So I don't think we need to delay the initiation of the process with kind of a comment round when there's space for that later on.
I would ask the question, if I may, how are we, like, a lot of people I'm talking to are not really knowing what we're discussing, to be prepared to ask questions or to come in not knowing? What are we doing to let the public know that? Because I think, like Tony said,
Before we have any more conversation, we need a second to amend.
There's been a motion to amend. Is there a second?
Is there a second motion to amend?
Somebody needs to second it just to make sure we move it.
Yeah, just somebody needs to second it so we can move it.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, thank you.
Now we can discuss it?
Now we can
Okay.
discuss it.
Okay. And I guess it would come back to how are we getting the public's involvement? I mean, we said, Carl, you said there will be time for them to come, but as we see at our meetings, we're not getting people to come. And I think, from me talking to people on the street, they have no idea what we're doing. And I don't know if that's just the website just got changed, so that didn't get out there. But they're not engaged in, this is what's happening. And if we're trying to present something that we want the public support, we got to do something different. So I don't know how we get their support, but I think we need to.
I'm sorry, did I miss something?
Actually, I had a question regarding the original motion that Mr. Feldman made. Who was the second on that?
Lizzie.
Me,
Oh, I'm sorry, thank you.
Ms. Wise.
Can we move to a vote on this amendment?
On the motion to change.
Is
or
there
the
any
first?
further discussion? We would move to a vote on the amendment that Carl proposed. Oh, I'm sorry, Tony's amendment. To make it,
Just for the public to have an opportunity to review the list of questions we generate and give feedback as to whether or not they feel any additional questions should be added for us to
Okay.
consider.
so the public will be able to review them because we are now posting our materials in advance of our meetings. So the amendment is to offer feedback in advance.
Offer
Of our-
feedback in advance or at the meeting where we plan to approve the questions, because that's what,
Okay, let's take a vote.
okay.
I didn't understand yet.
Mr. Harris, can you do a roll call
This is on the motion.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Byrd,
on the motion to amend?
this is on the motion to amend.
Aye.
I'm sorry, Ms. Cook?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Madam Secretary?
No.
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 So we're now back on the,
So the motion doesn't carry.
Motion to amend.
The motion to amend doesn't carry. Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
So the original motion carried,
You have the other motion.
I'm sorry?
the original motion.
Do we
haven't
have,
voted on the original motion yet.
Carl?
I made the original motion and I have no problem proceeding with it. I have to ask, why do we need this as a motion? Like, can't we just do it?
You need confirmation of the group, and that's not how you proceed, it's through motion.
Right, but I mean, do we need to motion to create the list and then motion to approve the list? And then, like, you can see how this is kind of crazy.
I don't think that's crazy. I mean, we're a government body. I think it makes sense that we need to all officially agree upon a list of questions before we start asking them. It's a little tedious, but that's kind of what government is.
I guess I'd rather agree on that final list than have this procedural kind of backwater over, are we going to start making a list? We can proceed here, but this comes up a lot in this body, and I think it's something we should think about in terms of like how we do the work that's in front of us. We have to be thinking about being efficient.
So, question, so if we would come up with a different question that's on the list, that I guess we're all gonna vote to approve the final list, is that what we're doing?
Can I
I just need
not be
clarity.
chair for a moment? How does that work?
Just cross-
I give the gavel to somebody else? Okay.
Designate the solicitor.
I'm designating the solicitor as chair for a moment. Would it be possible to decide that we're going to have 3 commissioners work with PEL to come up with the questions, to share with us, and we approve those questions? And then at some point, prior to our next meeting, when we're looking at those questions, we're sharing that with the public. Our website has a feedback form. On the list of questions, we can put something on the document that says, if you would like to provide additional questions or have comments or feedback on these questions, use this feedback form. Can we do something like that? I don't know how to create a motion for that.
Right, and I was just gonna ask, is that like, are we making another motion? Because when we made an amendment, no one was allowed to speak on something else until something was made and discussed when I tried to discuss, and I'm just trying to understand how that's working. So are we
Yeah, so,
actually,
yeah, you're good, Darlene.
Mr. Dastra, somebody else raised their hand first.
Okay.
So let's please try and keep it with order. Mr. McGrath?
So, I mean, I guess I'm going to say how I think we're set up to proceed here, and maybe that'll, so it sounds to me like, yeah, we're going to leave this meeting, Pennsylvania County League is going to, draft some questions, perhaps, that'll come back to us, perhaps in conjunction at Amy's suggestion with some members of the commission. We will, prior to the next meeting, we will publish those in advance. I mean, those will be distributed to us prior to the next meeting. They'll be published on the website. And then at our next meeting, we will take a vote to approve those questions and proceed from there to distribute those to the officials we want to discuss. Is that kind of how we have it?
It sounds like.
That's what I understand.
So then, to Tony's point, I mean, if we want, there'll be public comment at that meeting. If people want to come and make suggestions for additional questions, they'll have that opportunity. We can take that input into consideration. We can revise the questions during the course of the meeting if we so choose. But, we can leave the next meeting, with a final set of questions based upon the draft questions, our discussion, public input, and at the end of the next meeting, distribute those questions to the officials. Is that, I mean, that's how I think. So I guess I'm sort of reinforcing what I think I'm hearing Carl say, which is, I don't know that we need to encumber the process with, too many, motions and votes. I think we have, if we follow the process like I just described, I think we'll get to an outcome that is what we want at the end of our next meeting.
Do I need to announce I'm back to being the chair?
Yeah.
I am. So, Tony,
Thank you. So and like to clarify from Ms. Bird's comment, like, so what was happening earlier is that when we motion and second, that starts a first conversation. And then I had motioned and that required a second to then carry the conversation to that. So it is a little odd how it all works, but it's just because we can't discuss it until someone seconds it, because otherwise it dies on the floor. Because now we're having a conversation back to the original motion. And so now I actually have a question for you, Ms. Rufo. Do we have to just briefly form a subcommittee for the questions then, for the
Well,
3 people?
I was thinking if it's less than a quorum, we don't have to form an official committee.
Okay.
Those people can just work directly with PEL behind, work with them to make sure they have the questions that they're going to present to us, not having lots of deliberations or anything, just making sure that our consultants, our staff is doing the work that we need them to do, reviewing the stuff before it gets submitted.
Okay, that works.
That's
for me.
what I'm thinking.
I like that idea.
Maxine?
To all of you, what is common in these circumstances? What is common when there are, well, I guess there's not as many commissioners in some of the other home rule charters, municipalities. But with this amount of commissioners and this kind of going back and forth, what would be common is creating the 3 individuals to go back with you and create questions common? Or is it common that we would come up with the questions? Do you guide us in those questions? Can you answer that? Some of that.
Well, you are paying us for staff work, and it's a fixed fee. So for you to develop the questions would seem to be a waste of our time and your money, okay? Because we do have some questions in hand, designed for, they're not going to be cut and paste, but they're going to follow an order of introspection, trying to determine how the elected official views their role in the current city government.
Okay.
As far as what other commissions have done, I have seen it in many different ways. The most typical is committees, where 3 people or 2, as Fred mentioned, 2 or 3 people, you will interview the mayor, you will interview the treasurer, you will interview the chief of police, the controller, the city clerk, so that everyone is exposed to the process. But then you all have a grounding in your little expertise. So when you come to decide whether or not this is efficient and effective, you can essentially defend or criticize the function that's going on now. A committee of the whole, in my experience, and Fred and Patty may have a different opinion, is unwieldy and difficult, intimidating. You don't all, if you miss a meeting, you missed the interview. As you can see, it's hard to ask questions. I mean, you're stepping on each other, especially when, there's 9 trains of thought here, but there's probably only one person answering those questions, like the mayor. That's hard to juggle, it's hard to keep all those threads coherent. So in my mind, as a commission, you respect each other's opinions in your expertise as you develop it, and that's how you develop the expertise. That's why we're doing this as a committee of the whole. That's why we meet as a committee of the whole, so we all get exposed to the same knowledge. But we're all going to have some expertise in some area, and how are we going to develop that unless we do the work ourselves or work together? Is that?
Sure. So for the record, I just want to say that I like the idea of establishing a committee or committees to come up, to work with you all, to come up with those questions, and then bring it back to the entire commission,
I would suggest that.
for the record.
So that would be a motion to amend, because I think what the original motion was for them,
Just voted down.
Was option 1.
Yeah, it was on.
it was just option 1, to work with all of us. I guess the reason why I brought that up is I don't know what working with all of us means. So maybe,
I think the
It's sunshine,
simpler,
too,
I think the simpler way of approaching this procedurally is to vote on Mr. Feldman's motion, which would be to have, his motion was to have the group work with the Economy League to develop a series of questions.
Okay,
If that is approved, a subsequent motion could be made to establish a committee to do that process. Or the
Okay.
chair could appoint a
All right.
committee under your bylaw.
so do we have a motion to vote on?
The motion's
Oh,
already
mo-
made and seconded.
Okay, so can we take a vote?
Call the vote.
So let's call the vote.
So this is on the original motion?
This is on
Yes,
the original.
On the original motion.
Yes. Ms. Byrd?
Aye.
Ms. Cook?
Aye.
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 So the motion carries.
Madam Chair?
So the motion carries.
Madam Chair, if we could just editorialize, questions are designed to elicit knowledge, not to interrogate, okay? You're not examining people as performance today. You know, you're examining the interplay. You're examining the teeth on the cogs, how they're working together. Are they meshing? Are they worn? Has tradition changed those things compared to what and if those changes have occurred, is it efficient and effective? It's not interrogatory, which is where the public may think it is. You know, they may want a pound of flesh versus knowledge. We're going for knowledge here. Yeah, we're learning. This is all about learning.
John?
And I guess, if I was going to make a subsequent suggestion before we turn it into a motion, along the lines of our solicitor's suggestion, my suggestion would likely be that, we empower the chair to appoint, if we want to have a subset of our commission engaged with the Economy League, that we empower the chair to make those appointments, and that anybody who's interested in being appointed to that, contacts the chair, expresses their interest, the chair chooses 3 people. So I'll make a motion that we do what I just said.
And I'll second it.
Chair appoint a committee. Yeah, that's right.
Is there a second?
Bernard has to keep good notes.
Did you get
Carl
that well
has a
enough,
second.
Bernie? Did you get that well enough, Mr. Harris?
Yes, I'm sorry, in the second?
Feldman? Is there discussion?
Yeah. Why didn't we just make the motion for number 3? Option 3. It's exactly what it says. Why didn't we just vote for that instead of making a motion to approve 1 to change it to 3? I'm kind of a little lost.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not recommending that we change it to 3. I'm suggesting that we, it sounds like there's some interest among commission members to contribute to the process of developing questions that will circulate in writing. So, if that's the case, then my suggestion is, I'm not suggesting that we change to the 3rd option. I'm suggesting that we have a process for interested commissioners to step forward to participate in that process, and for the chair to appoint them as he sees fit.
Ms. Burt, if I may, there is a distinction between the first and the third option. The first option is that the commission would agree to a set of questions. They would be given out in writing and responses back, and then follow up as necessary with the individual. Option 3, the distinction is that 2 or 3 commission members would interview. That's not what you selected, though, but that's the distinction. They're not the same.
So, and the difference between the motion that's on the table now is?
Go ahead, Tony.
So, if I'm understanding right, the difference between the first with this subcommittee and the 3rd option would be that in the 3rd option, the same people interview all the individuals, correct? No.
No, that's not
No.
what it says.
No.
That's
No,
not what it says.
we're only
May I
talking about
explain?
the questions.
John's motion is specifically about a few of us working with PAL to develop only the questions.
Right.
Then we come back on August 3rd and those questions are submitted to us as a committee of the whole. We review those, make changes if we want to, and approve those questions to be then sent to the officers, the elected officials, who will submit to those answers in writing. Then we can decide what to do after that.
Gotcha. Okay. No in-person interviews for round one is what you're saying. Okay.
So then the
Okay.
questions are set. We don't ask other questions once we decide these are the questions that we're asking? Is that what you're saying?
If we come back on August 3rd and whatever, we vote on those, yes. And then once the written responses come back, we read those, and then we can say, oh,
I have
we want to
another
bring this
question.
person
Okay,
in and have a
gotcha.
little bit more conversation.
Okay.
We haven't determined how we would do any of that yet. Right now, all we're trying to decide is, are there a couple people who want to work with PEL to get the questions to bring to us on the 3rd? We don't have to do that. We can just ask PEL to bring us questions on the 3rd. I just thought maybe there were people who would want to be participating in that process with our staff. So there is a motion, and we're having a discussion, and it was seconded. So we're in discussion, but, okay.
Darlene has.
So Darlene has a question. Sorry, I'm sorry.
I have a question. So was there a number of questions that that we're limited to? No? Okay,
Patience of the person answering,
sure, okay,
right?
just curious.
Because you're asking for written responses, so
Sure.
they can elaborate as much as they want, which,
If there's no other questions or discussions, are there? Can we call the vote? Mr. Harris?
Ms. Byrd?
No.
Ms. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Dastra?
Yes.
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 Mr. McGrann?
Yes.
Yes. Motion carries. The only, we don't have anything else on our agenda, do we?
Budget.
Oh, right, PEL, you were going to discuss an update on the creation of the commission's budget.
yes, we're working with the three of us to come up with a budget that will be integrated into the city's grant application. We're looking at a budget that would take you through February as your first part, and then a supplemental budget going forward if you decide to write a charter, with the understanding that what you're authorizing to be spent is estimates and would be included in your final report along with all your other, what you actually expend at that time.
Does anyone have any questions for PEL?
Just, are you thinking that we'll have something to see on the 3rd?
Yes,
Yeah, great.
yeah, I'm sorry, Carl, I didn't look the wrong way, yes. It'll go, we're going to send it, of course, to
The chair.
the solicitor also, because it's getting integrated into the city's grant application. So we'll all be working over the next few weeks with that.
Okay.
And then I guess to the chair and then, yeah.
Darlene?
Yeah, I just want to say that I talked to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different places of holding meetings, and they all did say there would probably be a cost depending on who's doing the live streaming and stuff. So to consider that in your budget.
What,
And I did present, I
did
can
they
give you.
give you a range of prices?
No, they didn't. Some of them said donations would accept, and depending on what all they had to do, if they had to have a technician to do the live streaming, or would the city be providing somebody to do that?
I don't think the city would be.
I'm going to reiterate what I said at meeting one, which is I'm willing to provide my video services for our commission wherever we meet. The only request I have is if we want it live streamed, the facility will need to have a Wi-Fi connection. I can record them at least, and then I suppose I could give them to Mr. Harris for later uploading if no connection is made, but I just want to remind everybody that, I'm happy to do that as long as, I'm physically able to be there at a meeting.
Thanks, Tony.
Very good. And then, the other question I had, so who are the 3 people that are meeting with them? I'm just missing
We haven't,
that.
I would
We
say that
skipped
whoever
over
is
that.
interested should let the chair know that they would like to do that.
So email Brian. Or,
Yes.
To go over questions. Yes.
Madam Chair, if I could just kind of go back to the 2 study guides to kind of briefly summarize, we've went through them with you. You've asked some questions. We understand that you need time to digest that material, to think through it. At the August 3rd meeting, we won't go through the presentation again, but we can open it for additional questions that you may have, because we feel that that educational process is critical in the early stages to give you the foundation that you need to move through the interview process and beyond, if you will. So, I just want to indicate that, we recognize that there's a lot of material there to digest, and, we'll certainly entertain additional questions that you may have at the next meeting, or even between meetings if necessary.
Are there any other questions or other matters to discuss? Otherwise, we could adjourn.
I think so. I'm just trying to figure out how to ask the question.
Okay.
So since it is a lot of information to digest, and for some of us who may not have it all together and know what we're looking at as far as looking at the charter and keeping that the focus, and then comparing it to the city code, are there specific things that we should be looking for? Or should we just be comparing the 2 and coming up with our own questions
Well, I think the
to bring back to you?
Yeah, I think, and Mr. Cross talked a little bit about this too, but the interplay between the different offices is a critical element that you want to look at, how those offices are working back and forth together. Is it a smooth operation? Are there some bumps in the road? So that's an area that I think you want to pay particular attention to.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
When you're looking at the optional plan, you want to look at the overall financial environment where the mayor is responsible for the budget with the Department of Administration preparing it, but the council is integral to that. They approve it and they can change it, but they can only change it a certain amount. Then the mayor may want to do something, but if it's a law, the mayor is charged to enforce the laws, but someone has to write the laws, and how does that work? And what authorities can the council put against the mayor or not? So focus on the charter, and when you read it, to see how each, as Fred said, the interplay, look at them as characters in a play.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
and yeah, don't exhaust yourself in detail. It's sort of, we're going to be asking questions of the mayor and president council, I guess, the first couple. So focus on council's role, the mayor's role.
Question for the rest of the commission, I suppose, because the minimum here is mayor, council, this questions list is for all these minimum individuals, correct? Yes.
Well, we're going to, we suggest you start with the mayor and president of council and then move to the other elected officials, the controller, treasurer, other members of council, and then department heads. So it's going, I mean, you're not going to do that all at one time. That's basically an August, September timeframe.
You'll be
to
going
do that.
even into October perhaps as follow-up, and then you'll at the same time be looking at comparable municipalities and trying to understand how they function, other council plan As, but you have to get your grounding in how Lancaster is operating right now.
Okay. My question to the commission, and I know this is early on then, because we're doing the elected officials first, but how would you all feel if we included our chief city planner to the list? Because they have a lot of interaction between mayor and council in different capacities. And planning is a relatively new field. Like, it's not mentioned, for example, in the third class city code, but it is becoming more standard. I'm very interested what Douglas Smith might say.
Carl?
I think we can figure this out later. My personal opinion is that the department head who's responsible for the chief planner's work is sufficient.
I personally I don't know yet, but I think that's interesting. I don't have an opinion. Is there anything else? Otherwise, we could adjourn. Before we would adjourn, I just wanted to summarize what you all said we were going to do on August 3rd. You're going to do a presentation about the city budget, understanding where the revenue comes from, where the money and expenditure is going, discussion about taxation, and look at spending priorities. We're going to approve the questions to submit to the identified staff and elected officials, and look at the budget again, and anything else that we come up with in the next 2 weeks. So I guess we'll be adjourned. Thank you.
Wait, don't we got to motion that?
Yeah, we have to motion. No,
Did I miss something?
you have to motion for that.
You adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
I second that.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Sort of worked out.